So, Max, perhaps the best way to restart our interview would be to ask you, who is Max More? In other words, in your own words, would you say that you're a philosopher, a transhumanist, a singularitarian, a futurist, an entrepreneur? Who is Max More?
Oh boy, okay. Tough question. Well, I chose the name More something like 20 years ago or so to express what I think of as the essence of who I want to be, which is to be a process, not to be an end product, but to be continually changing and growing, hopefully. I adopted that name as a reminder to keep doing that. When I was at the philosophy department back in the early 90s, one of the professors there asked me, why not call yourself Max Most? And I said, well, that would be a horribly arrogant name. That would sound like I'm the most I'm ever going to be, or the most that anybody can be. The whole point of the name was that it's a reminder to keep improving.
Was he
So I don't like to.
sarcastic?
Sorry?
Was he sarcastic in his question?
No, not really. I don't know. Not particularly, I don't think. He was friendly. But so really, there isn't anything I would identify myself with. There's no particular job. Philosopher certainly is not a term I like to use unadorned uh, by any modifiers. That's why on my signature line you'll see strategic philosopher. As again, because as I was saying earlier on, I don't have a very high opinion of much of philosophy. I think a large part of it is not very practical or useful. It's just an academic discipline that has its own priorities. But by calling myself a strategic philosopher, the idea is to combine that with economics and psychology and strategy, and be able to use philosophy as something more useful and more focused. I wouldn't really call myself an entrepreneur. I'm not really skilled in that area. That's not really my personality type. Although I have had a tendency to start things up, not so much businesses, but non-profits and magazines and publications and groups. I've always done that, I think, since I was quite young. Extropy magazine was one of, I think, at least 6 magazines I've started over the years. So not so much entrepreneurial. And these days, what I'm doing, of course, is a little bit different. Running a reasonable sized non-profit organization is quite different from sitting at home just writing things on my own. So when you ask me the question, you'll get a different answer every 10 years or so, I hope, I'd expect. So I try out different things.
Yeah, that was also my sort of a segue towards your latest position as the CEO of the Alcor Life Extension Foundation. So I wanted to ask you, how is that different or related to the work that you did before going to Alcor? And what are the challenges that you're currently facing there and the goals thereof?
Well, getting this job at Alcor is interesting quarter-century turnaround, if you like, because 25 years ago, just before I left England, when I joined Alcor as a member, when I was in my early 20s, I was then challenged to start something in England because there really wasn't any kind of cryonics organization in Europe other than a few people talking. And so that's what I did with a few friends. We got together and we founded Mizar Limited, Mizar being the companion star to Alcor, and it was eventually renamed Alcor UK. So then, I was active in cryonics for a while, and then I kind of moved away from that a bit, but now coming back to the same organization, but this time actually running the organization. So it's an interesting kind of a circuitous route to coming back to the job. It's a very challenging job because obviously cryonics is not very popular. Among those who've heard of it, the vast majority don't understand it. They don't really know what we do. But more and more people are beginning to hear about it, partly because of the press, partly because it pops up in movies, increasingly so now. We're seeing people in various stages of cryonic suspension, probably starting with the movie 2001, where people were put into some kind of suspended animated state. There are many, many challenges, among which are, well, simply running a membership organization, being responsible for people's lives, making sure everything goes smoothly, getting research done to improve the cryopreservation methods we use, trying to communicate the ideas to the public. There are just a lot of different aspects to it.
Mm-hmm. So if you were to tell somebody who's never been exposed to the idea before, what is cryonics all about? And how is your non-profit organization fit within that?
Right. Well, cryonics to me is a natural outgrowth of my interest in life extension. It's really one of the things you can do now, given that you don't know how long you're going to live, you don't know when you're going to die. Just a few days ago, an old friend of mine was found to be dead, having died several days earlier, and he didn't have arrangements for cryopreservation, and that was very sad. So I think this is kind of a core aspect of transhumanism, something you can do practically. Now, I think there's some part of your question I'm forgetting.
So how is the work at the Alcor Foundation fit within the cryonics science?
Well, the Alcor Foundation is primary focus is really on getting people into cryopreservation, getting them cryopreserved, and keeping them there indefinitely. That's our main mission. Our main mission is not to do the research that will allow them to be revived in the future. That may become something we do. That may be something other organizations specialize in. But our main focus is very much on our patients, on protecting them, and making sure that we improve our processes. I think Alcor is perhaps distinguished from other cryonics organizations in our focus on the best technology that's available. There are other organizations that are less expensive than Alcor, but they generally offer lower quality cryopreservations. And that's fine. I think there's room for everybody. It's an ecosystem. I'm on very good terms with the leaders of these other organizations. That is our niche, if you like. We're just about, well, the two largest American organizations are fairly similar in size. We may be a teeny bit bigger, but that's really our focus is the best possible procedures, the most advanced technology, and to keep improving that as well as we can.
So as far as I know, there's at least two types of preservation. One is just partial, which preserves the head and the brain and so on, and one is full, the whole body preservation. Perhaps you wouldn't mind explaining a little bit to our viewers about how that process works, how they can join you, and what would be the cost associated with it?
Yes, the two main versions these days are whole body cryopreservation and neuropreservation, where you preserve only the brain, although in practice you actually preserve the brain inside the skull because it's simply easy to do and it provides extra protection, mechanical protection. And I've actually always been signed up as a neuropreservation case. I have sufficient life insurance that I could do whole body, but I'm still a neuro case. And the rationale behind that is that the kind of damage that would be sustained to you in becoming legally dead, both what actually killed you, additional damage that's still done by the cryopreservation process, because it's not perfect, even though we continue to improve it. And looking at the brain, we do a pretty good job of preserving it if conditions are good, but there is damage done, and the brain's a very complex organ. It seems to those of us who are neuro cases that the kind of technology you need to repair that level of damage will probably find it relatively trivial by comparison to regrow a body, either to regenerate it from the cells you have, to clone it from your DNA and then implant the brain. That actually doesn't seem so far off. We're already growing whole organs and various tissues. We've made a lot of advances in cloning technology. So that doesn't seem really so far off, whereas repairing a brain with the current level of damage is still a pretty ambitious goal. Now, it may change. It may be that I'll change my mind and go whole body. One big change that we've had, for instance, in cryonics in the last decade or so, is increasing use of vitrification. In vitrifying, what you do is introduce a much higher level of cryoprotectant solution to wash out as much of the body water as possible. And then as you cool it, instead of crystallizing and forming ice crystals, which is very bad news, even though under traditional protocols you minimize that as much as you could, still with vitrification, that's even more minimized. And instead of crystallizing, it forms a very thick glass, if you like. It locks everything in place. And so we do that. Originally, it was just for neuro cases. Now we do whole body vitrification. And it may be that at some point, the level of damage done in a good cryopreservation might be actually fairly small. And at that point, I might want to switch to whole body, because it might be that if I'm killed by some fairly repairable problem, I have an accident, or I have cancer that's then cured, I might come back more quickly as a whole body. It's kind of hard to say. But it is more expensive to do a whole body. It's we require $200,000 of funding for that, as compared to $80,000 for perpetual upkeep. And there may be some advantages in going neuro at the moment, in that you can target the specific neural tissue. Different tissues in the body have different requirements for cryoprotection. But if the brain is the most important, then you want to optimize on that.
So let me get this right. Partial or neuro preservation starts at around 80,000, and full body is starting at around 200,000. Because
That's right.
that doesn't seem, you know, ridiculously expensive to me. I mean, I know of people who spend 30, 40, $50,000 for a graveyard lot, believe it or not. And in my opinion, at least, there's no comparison between the upside of one and the upside of the other, if I may say so.
Yeah, and of course, any major medical procedure these days costs a huge amount of money. You can spend that much in a hospital very quickly having any kind of procedure.
Absolutely.
So we actually do urge our members to make more funds available than the minimum. These are really minimum levels. But of course, with inflation over time, if you sign up with the current minimums in 30 years' time, that may not be adequate. And we may have more advanced methods that may cost more money to deploy. For instance, in May at the Suspended Animation Conference, there'll be some talk about liquid ventilation, which may be a more expensive method, but give you even higher quality preservation. So we really recommend that people fund it higher than the minimum so they can afford it if it goes up, or if there are better options available. And I should point out that for those who aren't familiar with the funding, some of that money goes into actually doing the procedure, the surgery, transport, stabilization. But a large chunk of that money then goes into the Patient Care Trust Fund, which is very separate from the rest of the organization's operations income. And that money is invested very conservatively, and the interest from that is used, if necessary, forever, for as long as necessary, to pay for the upkeep of the patients, to replace liquid nitrogen, eventually to replace the dewars in which they're stored. So we don't touch most of that money. That's reserved for the future.
So the other question is the process that one who is interested in embracing cryonics have to follow. So I would provide the link to your website, but say a person comes to your website, what's the process? What's the next step in that process then?
Well, I mean, the first step, depending on the person, but the first step would be to really read about the subject, to really understand what's going on, to understand what we're doing and what we're not promising. We're not guaranteeing this is going to work. This is an experimental procedure. We don't know if it will ever work. We do have evidence that when a cryopreservation is done well, the microstructure of the brain is pretty well preserved. You can look on the website at the electron micrograph studies. So it looks promising, but we don't know if it's going to work. So one of the first things we do before we accept a member is make sure they're educated, that they know what they have reasonable expectations, that they understand this is not a guarantee. So that's a very important thing, to have informed consent. So I recommend anybody who only vaguely knows about the idea, even if they're enthusiastic, should first of all read all our disclaimers and uncertainties. And then if someone wants to actually become a member, it's really a lot easier than it used to be. There are certain forms that have to be filled out. On our website, you can download the membership application. It's just a few pages, fill in the relevant details, and then our membership administrator generates the paperwork, the Cryonics suspension contract, and a few other papers that you would then sign. We still get complaints that it's kind of a complex process, but I know when I signed up and you had to make multiple copies of everything, and the stack of papers was just ridiculous. Now it's a fraction of that, so it is a lot better. But it takes generally a few weeks to work through that, because we need to have things like, apart from the person's own agreement and various choices they have to make about their funding arrangements and under what conditions they don't want to be cryopreserved. If their brain is completely destroyed, do they still want to go ahead? If they aren't found for a week after legal death, do they still want to go ahead? But we also encourage them to get relatives to sign affidavits that say they won't interfere with the process, because that's been a frequent problem in the past.
I see.